Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Rotten Horror Picture Show. The podcast, it's a horror podcast where we talk about the 200 best and highest rated horror movies on RottenTomatoes.com. That's what it is.
Good job.
Thank you. And today, we are going to be talking about number 170, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and we have a guest on with us.
Special guest.
From our sister or brother or sibling show, Real Ripe, Real Rotten. We have Wes. Wes, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Gender is outdated anyway, Clay, so it's not brother or sister. It's just them. It's the them podcast. Good.
Gender is a construct.
How are you guys?
Good. I'm good. I'm Clay, obviously, and with me, as always, is Amanda. Amanda, how are you?
I'm all right. I'm getting over a wonderful cold that
Excellent.
I am fully prepared to give to you, Clay.
Oh, I've got it coming at me from all angles, so so far I'm dodging bullets. Wes is on because on our sibling podcast, we covered Wes Craven, his highest and lowest Rotten Tomatoes scored movies, and a middle one as well, which were Scream, Vampire in Brooklyn, and A Nightmare on Elm Street. So we thought it would be appropriate to have Wes back on to talk about this one, because we were on the fence about doing this one. And I was really interested in doing it because we had Nightmare on Elm Street, and so having the bookend I thought would be good. So I'm glad we get to talk about it now. Have either of you seen this movie before?
I had not.
No, I've
Wes,
never seen it
no?
before. No. And to be clear, we were going to choose this as his potential B-roll for Real Ripe, and we decided to go with Scream instead because I think Scream makes more sense for Wes Craven than this one does. So I
to
answer
so
your
too.
question, I have not seen this movie before watching it for this.
Yeah, I was pushing for this one only because I thought it was an interesting pairing with Nightmare on Elm Street. But it doesn't matter because we get to do it now.
Yeah, and I'm actually excited that we had done Scream as well because
Yes.
I think there's going to be a lot of interesting interplay between all three of them.
I think so too.
Mark it, common mark. Okay, and action.
It's 7 films later. The actors are assembled.
Stop.
The effects artists are hard at work.
A little bit more blood. More blood.
Wes Craven is making a new Nightmare on Elm Street.
And cut. Print that, Gretchen.
But this time, the world he's creating seems to be coming true.
He's decided to cross over.
Freddy Krueger returns,
Out of films, into our reality.
and he wants more than revenge.
Maybe you should tell me your dream.
Miss me. He wants life.
Nancy.
It's been giving me Freddy nightmares.
Freddy. As in me.
Is it a movie?
How would you like to join us in the definitive nightmare?
I thought you killed Freddy off.
1, 2, Freddy's coming for you.
Until Mommy gets back, don't fall asleep.
Is it a dream? Or is it real?
Ever play Skin the Cat?
Freddy's got my baby! He's got my Dylan!
For everyone who ever believed Freddy's dead. Prepare yourselves for the real story. Wes Craven's
The story for a movie.
New Nightmare.
Nature Maker.
You mentioned this is 170 on the Rotten Tomatoes list.
Yes, number 170.
So I guess what I take from that is that there are at most 169 great horror films. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah.
Wow,
I would
you
assume.
should have just seen the heartbreak on Clay's face.
No, honestly, no, because so this is a movie I've seen a handful of times, and I've been told by the world that this is a masterpiece.
Oh.
That this is like, this is the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie. It's a great meta commentary on horror movies, and I really want that to be true, but I don't think it's really all there. I think some of that's there, but not everything. And to get into it, it's as I said, it's number 170 on this list. It's Rotten Tomato score is 80%. Its adjusted score is 82, which I still don't know what that. I should probably look that up. At some point.
There's a lot of 3 out of 5s making that an 80%. Though, if you go through and look at it, it's a lot of like this is fine, but 3 out of 5.
This is fine. Yeah, like that meme with the dog and the burning building. Yeah,
nothing spells. Sorry, but nothing speaks to like higher quality than a 3 out of 5 and giving it the little ripe tomato. But that's the flaw of the Rotten Tomato meter is that.
Well, if you've noticed, they've had to like come up with a secondary tomato. It's the one that says certified fresh on it.
Yes.
Because it's like it's not just over 50, it's like over 85. And this one actually I think has that on it, oddly enough. But directed by Wes Craven. It's from I think 1994, and it stars Heather Langenkamp, Robert Englund, David Newsom, and Miko Hughes. And Amanda, what happens in this movie?
In this movie, reality and fantasy meet in unsettling ways in this installment of the long-running horror series, which finds director Wes Craven and actors Heather Langenkamp and Robert Englund all portraying themselves. As Heather considers making another film with Craven, her son Dylan falls under the spell of the iconic disfigured villain Freddy Krueger. Eventually, Langenkamp must confront Freddy's demonic spirit to save the soul of Dylan. And we would say that things you'll find in this movie include aggressive accessorizing, crotch-related mishaps, questionable parenting,
once again,
poor work-life balance, and gratuitous John Saxon.
Always a good thing. But yeah, so just to kind of jump off what I was saying before, I want to like this movie, but I don't think that I do. So
interesting.
I would like to hear what you guys have to say. Wes, you want to lead it off for us?
Yeah, I think this is actively a bad movie, and I think that it for me it really comes down to what we finished up our conversation about Craven as, which is that I don't think Wes Craven is a good filmmaker.
That's right. I forgot your blanket Wes bias.
Yeah, I mean he's functional, I suppose, but I don't think that he doesn't have a single skill in the director toolbox that I would be like, that is his thing, and he's good at it. And I think that this is pretty much that movie. Like, I like this much worse than the original Nightmare on Elm Street in a lot of ways. Like, I don't find Craven to be a visually interesting director. I don't think he writes scripts that are very interesting in any way. I think that the way that he builds his worlds is like counterproductive to the terror that he's kind of trying to drill or into people or make feel real. And so I just feel that this was such an inert movie. Like there's like nothing moving in it. It feels like the first hour and a half takes about 3 hours to get through. And then finally it breaks into something, but it just goes and goes. And I felt sort of annoyed by it. I didn't think it was very good, and I think that people who think that it's a clever movie are overstating what it's actually saying about things.
Yeah, my big feeling was that it doesn't really pick up until she goes to visit Wes at his house, and he kind of lays out what's going on. Everything before that, there was like one or two ideas. I was like, all right, that's kind of interesting. But aside from that, I felt the same way. It's just not a lot happening, and it doesn't feel like it goes anywhere. Amanda, what do you think?
I agree with what you guys have been saying, and it's interesting. It's interesting to know, Clay, that you don't really like this movie, because since you had suggested it for our B-roll on Real Ripe and Real Rotten, I was watching it with the assumption, I was like, all right, Clay likes this movie. This might be where Clay and I's taste in horror movies diverge.
My suggestions do not always equal recommendations or like
an endorsement.
Twitter retweets do not equal endorsements.
Exactly.
Endorsement.
Yeah. No, I find it. The thing that I found interesting about it is I like the idea of looking at the first one and then the last one.
Yeah.
You know, as a bookend and how his approach changed. I think this movie's fairly lazy for about 90% of it, is at least visually anyway. But continue.
Oh yeah, but I would say about this that the things that this movie almost does, like that are the almost interesting things about this movie are done better in Scream.
Yes.
Like if there are elements of this movie that you kind of like or you wish went a little bit further or were a little different, like the meta commentary, some of the humor, I think all of that's done better in Scream.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot in this that is ends up in Scream too,
Yeah.
where you've got the creepy phone call guy.
Oh yeah, that's one of my notes. Says that Wes Craven must just be haunted by telephones.
Yeah,
all
well,
the
actually,
time.
that was something that actually happened to Heather Langenkamp in real life.
Oh,
that they worked
really?
into it. Yeah,
poor thing.
This was one of those movies where like real life things ended up falling in. So that was one. There actually was a giant earthquake in L.A. Right around the time they were shooting this. So they did a lot of second unit that was just B-roll of actual wreckage.
My husband was in that earthquake.
Oh, that's right. He was.
Yeah. He was there. He was out in California as a kid on vacation, and there was that crazy earthquake.
He's fine though.
Is he?
Severe head damage from something falling.
I mean, he married me, so.
You know why?
Anyway.
You know why? Well, I think the way that I'd actually be interested in starting this is because I think Scream is effective because Scream's meta is understandable in what it's talking about. It's making fun of horror tropes. It's making fun of like the horror movie as a genre. Yes. I don't really get a sense of what this is commenting on. I like the only thing that I can kind of take away from it is that it seems almost like it's a commentary on fame and being a star of a movie that blows up and you can never really escape it, sort of like I feel like Craven is almost disillusioned with the franchise at this point. And I wonder, they say that there are scenes in this that he's just sort of remaking from the original where the girl gets dragged to the ceiling and killed and stuff like that. And I'm sitting there thinking, this is really boring, and it either seems like he's redoing it because he doesn't have a fresh idea, or because the more generous thing to say about it would be, is he doing this because he thinks that sequels are just redundant repetition of things you've already done before? Like, what does he think about this movie, and why is the meta aspect so difficult to pin down in what he thinks he's talking about here? Because I don't really, it doesn't have this clean through line like Scream does. And I think that's kind of a problem with it, but it doesn't hold my attention because I can't really grab onto what he wants to say with this movie.
Yeah, there's one scene in it that I actually thought was the most interesting, and I thought it felt to me at the time anyway that it was the clearest thematically about the stuff that he was kind of dealing with, which was the talk show scene.
Yes, that's exactly what I was thinking of when Wes was talking.
Yeah, where Heather Langenkamp is on a talk show, and the talk show host is just peppering her with questions about, like, what's Freddy like in real life, and she's kind of getting annoyed by it. And then Robert Englund in full Freddy makeup surprises her and comes out, and the entire crowd is dressed like Freddy and waving.
Yeah, they have signs.
They've got signs, toys, and everything. And he says, "You're all my children now," which is, a line from the second one. And I was watching that going like, oh, that's really interesting, commenting on this idea of like children fetishizing this child killer. This evil
children
monster.
and everyone.
Right.
Like adults too.
Yeah. But I ultimately don't think that's really what he's doing, because it's later on in the movie he talks about Freddy being this ancient evil that is obviously this is all bullshit, but it's not
but
real.
He delivers it very
giggling.
seriously when he's talking about it. Yeah.
But he talks about Freddy being this ancient evil that is contained by stories until the story gets homogenized or it sells out, and he's very like tongue-in-cheekly critical of the whole series, like you're saying, Wes.
Yeah.
But I thought that scene in on the talk show was an interesting moment, but the rest of it didn't really follow it up. I thought, what do you guys think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about it. It's kind of a.
Do you have any other thread? Like I'm genuinely curious because I thought I might be missing something about what this movie is, but I just don't think he's clear enough. I think the script is weak. I don't think that he is.
It's got like 2 or 3 cool ideas, and then the rest of it, when I was saying it doesn't really pick up until he lays out to Heather exactly what's going on, and then it just kind of turns into a fairly routine horror movie. It seems like everything before that is where he's kind of putting in his heady ideas. But even there, Wes, I agree. He's got like 2. They're not super clear. And then eventually it's just like, well, she's got to go save her son from the monster with claw hands.
Yeah.
This movie feels like, honestly, again, sorry, English major bullshit. It feels like a first draft. It feels like the first draft of an idea that's going to become Scream. Like, I've had so many teachers say that like when you write your first draft, the good point you get to at the very end is what you need to write your entire next draft about.
Right.
And that's what this kind of feels like he's working through it. He's working through some ideas. Is it about like fandom and fame, and people kind of fetishizing the bad guy at the expense of the hero and heroine? Or is it about, trauma passed down from generations? Is it about, metatextual horror movie stuff? Or is it about storytelling? It's like he hasn't figured out what he really wants it to be about yet.
Well, he's also confusingly against, because the Black Doctor character is like basically anti-horror movies. So he's also commenting on people who think that horror movies are no good. So he's like
and that character is named after someone who works for the MPAA, who he constantly would butt heads with.
Oh,
when
really?
He was trying to get his movies rated. Yes.
Sure. So
that was Clay's trivia corner.
So I would agree that it's a first draft. I would say that it's maybe like a brainstorming session that he just kind of wrote out at that point, and he didn't really finalize what he wanted to talk about. But I just think that it might be too personal to Craven in a way. Like Scream is not that, because as a horror genre viewer, you can kind of relate to Scream in a way that this movie maybe is just too close to the vest for Craven to really get what he's talking about across effectively.
Yeah,
I don't even know if he's doing it well, but that's,
Like this is a meta commentary on the Nightmare franchise, whereas Scream is a meta commentary on horror movies in general. So Scream is more accessible and also more satisfying because you don't need to have an encyclopedic knowledge of just like Wes Craven's work. You can even just be vaguely familiar with horror movies and enjoy Scream. Whereas with this, like, I know, like Clay's already pointed out a couple things that are these sort of real life tie-ins that once I hear them, they're fascinating, but the average person isn't going to know that.
Wes Craven actually has a really interesting quote about this in comparison to Scream, and he doesn't say it as a criticism, but I think it should be used as a criticism, which is, he says, New Nightmare was made for the people who made Nightmare on Elm Street. Scream is made for the fans. And I think that's what's missing and why Scream works and this doesn't really work, because it almost feels like it, until it turns back into essentially Nancy versus Freddy for the final 15 minutes or so. Yeah. It's kind of a big in-joke.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
And I
Krueger,
think that's
Krueger
why
doesn't show up for an hour and 15 or something. Like he's just
he
not
had
present.
to stop. He had to stop off at the London Fog store and get like a brand new jacket. I can't. I fucking hate the way he looks in this movie.
Well,
I hate that hat. I hate the jacket. I hate the dumb claw. I hate his face.
I hate
got
his
like
face.
Knee-high
the
boots
weird
on.
snake face.
Yeah. It doesn't. That's one of my other big problems. Is it's too clean.
Yeah.
It feels like, if you look at Nightmare on Elm Street, the first one, it's gritty. It's it's low budget. It's
dark, visually dark. Whereas this one has got that Scream, bright lighting, California sunshine all the time.
This feels like, as much as it might be a personal idea, like you said, Amanda, this feels like studio Wes Craven just doing a job.
Yeah.
There's nothing interesting visually going on. Like there's towards the end, there's a couple things maybe.
I think he's a bad visual director in general. I don't think
I
he's
would
very
generally
visually...
agree with you. Yeah. I would generally. I think Vampire in Brooklyn looks better than this movie.
Shot on set. Yeah.
No, Wes, you can't see, but I actually wore a hat in honor of this Freddy Krueger to this recording.
It's a nice hat. I think you might have got it at the same store.
Maybe.
Yeah.
It's like
Craven is. I think that watching this kind of solidified for me, because I'll go on his visual thing a little bit. Like the horror directors that I really like, and it's not like it's a new thing, because I think that Carpenter does a better job of this than Craven does. There needs to be a sense in a horror movie of visual dread to things.
Right.
And Craven doesn't seem able to do that, even when he has a character who is a burnt pedophile with a claw hand. Like and I think that the problem here is, to go back to like Krueger's makeup. His makeup is so clean and he's so lit to show off the new makeup and how he looks, that I think he looks scarier in this movie, but he's not correct for what the movie. He's not
Right.
correct for what Freddy Krueger is supposed to be. So
Right.
you're left with this the burning thing is key to the Krueger because he's scared of the fire at the end of this movie, and if you don't realize it's because he was burnt, him being scared of the fire doesn't make any sense really.
And then he turns into a weird demon as he's dying.
A demon.
too.
He looks more like Inside Out Boy from the Nickelodeon show in this.
Yes, he does. Yes.
He's just kind of inside out. And
Yep.
Craven can't do the Carpenter thing of just seeing Michael Myers standing in a bush for a second, and then you cut back and you don't see him anymore. He doesn't have any of the hereditary stuff of what's in the shadows. Like you see a glimpse of something, and he shoots everything like it's an 80s sitcom almost. It's very, very strange and very unterrifying. And I wasn't scared of Nightmare. I think this movie's even less scary than the original Nightmare. There's only one jump scare where he comes out of the closet and you know it's coming, and that I would even classify as remotely scary in any way.
Yeah, I really like the way the first Nightmare is shot. I think it's a lot more atmospheric and moody, and I think a lot of that is because they're hiding. They need to hide more stuff, and also it's a horror movie. It's at night for the most part. 90% of this movie takes place at noon.
Yeah, even when people are supposed to be falling asleep, it's very, very bright.
Yeah, the opening scene is they're shooting a movie, and they're shooting it's a dream, but they're shooting a Freddy sequel. And it's very brightly lit, and then they call cut, and it's very bright in there, and then the hand starts freaking out, but it's not scary. It looks kind of silly.
Yeah, I laughed at that scene.
Yeah, and then the next scene is Heather waking up in the morning, and then she goes to this thing during the day, and then after her husband's killed, they have the funeral in the middle of the day, and that's not really scary. And then they get the thing with the kid when he's climbing up onto the thing because he's trying to see God or whatever.
He wants God to take him.
Yeah, and that's not really scary. Maybe that's something where it's it's scarier if you have a young child, and maybe some of that seeped into this one. Maybe he didn't have kids at the time or something. I don't know.
I think he did, though.
I think he did too. Yeah, because actually his daughter's in it.
She's
a nurse. She's 25 or 30.
Yeah. Well, just as a brief contextualization, A Nightmare on Elm Street came out in 1984.
Mm-hmm.
And this came out in 1994.
Yep.
And then Scream came out in 1996.
Right.
Which I was actually shocked at how close in time this is to Scream. As many threads as I saw that clearly are leading to something like Scream, just the way the sets are set up, the way people are dressed and their hair is done, I would have pegged this movie as 1989.
Yeah. I think it goes to like Wes said. It mostly looks like it's shot like a sitcom.
Yeah.
And the lighting's really flat and boring. There's a lot of stuff in office buildings for some reason.
Yeah.
Where she goes to New Line Cinema, and that's a boring scene. And she's backstage after the talk show. And that's fairly boring looking. And I think
her house is fairly boring looking. She's got prints of 80s plants.
Her husband is the worst actor I've ever seen in a horror movie, potentially.
He's terrible. Yeah, he's
but
awful.
That's the other thing about Craven. Craven, I know that he's stuck with some of the cast from the original Nightmare in this, right? He has to use Langenkamp and stuff like that. She's not a great actress, but
I thought she was better in this.
Yeah, I think she's much better in this than she was in the first one.
Yeah, 10 years have passed, I guess, or whatever. But she's not. She's not.
Wes is not buying it.
She's not super effective. Her husband is terrible, and what happens with Craven casting people like this is that it really takes me out of the world and makes me realize this is all a movie. It's like blaring at you that this is a movie. This is a movie.
Yeah.
And I think it really hurts him a lot. And I feel that Scream is kind of the same way, but it works in Scream because Scream is doing something different with it. It wants to do that to you.
Yeah.
But something like here where I'm supposed to believe that an evil spirit force has taken the form of Freddy Krueger and is now, and it I need that to actually feel like it's a real thing, and it never feels like it's reality to me.
That was one of the things I think that made it hardest for me to get into this time was 35 minutes in, I'm not buying the concept. When you get to the point where Wes Craven is actually telling her what's going on, you're setting up more of a traditional sort of story.
I have to continue writing my script.
Yeah, and then from that point on, it turns into kind of like In the Mouth of Madness a little bit, which is kind of fun, which also came out around the same time. But it's still up until that point, it's like, so she's supposed to be, it's real life, but her husband's being killed by a dream monster. And,
she doesn't seem to care very much after, like, the funeral happens, and then she's like, I don't know, that's fine.
And, like, if I feel like it would have been a lot more successful if they, and I mean, obviously, I guess it breaks the concept if you do this, but if they had just pulled, like, a Halloween 2018, and been like, what if Nancy's not dead? Because, spoiler alert, Nancy dies in the third movie. But, like, just bring Nancy back. This is Nancy 10 years later, dealing with what, and just tell her. But I guess that's too normal of a movie and probably not interesting for him.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like it would have been more interesting if it had been like, either there was actually this crazed fan who was trying to be Freddy Krueger in real life, and maybe there was some, like, slight supernatural hints thrown in, like, is he actually channeling this evil Freddy Krueger, or you know what I mean? Like, that would have been more interesting. Maybe there's already a Nightmare on Elm Street movie about that, because there's been so many and I have not seen them all.
Clay's Trivia Corner Part 2.
Yes.
There was a previous version of the script where the person sending her letters and calling her on the phone is actually the babysitter, who's being used by Freddy as, like, a, whatever.
Yeah.
A surrogate or proxy or something. Yeah.
So he's possessed the babysitter. And
yeah,
is doing
more
this.
or less.
Yeah.
Which they clearly dropped.
Yeah. Or even if they had it be like Heather Langenkamp, the character, is actually going crazy.
Yeah, because they hint at that too.
Yeah.
Because she says the thing about she has insanity or schizophrenia in her family, and they do the thing with the kid where they say, oh, well, these things which could be caused from lack of sleep also could be childhood schizophrenia, and they kind of do that thing.
Yeah, they throw away that really interesting idea where the nurse, when they bring the kid to the hospital, they're like, the mother isn't letting him sleep. And I was like, oh.
Right. Yeah,
like
that she's like a Munchausen by proxy situation.
Yeah, but they don't really play that up in the movie. Like, the sleep thing is funny because I feel that this character is Freddy Krueger in name only and has, like, nothing really to do with my understanding of what Krueger is supposed to be.
I think if you asked Wes Craven, he would probably agree with you, because that's what it feels like.
That he doesn't think it's Krueger in real life.
Yes.
Okay. Is that intentional, or
not
he fucked
canon
it up?
Krueger?
No, I think that's probably intentional. I think the idea is that this is not Freddy Krueger. This is some other demon, other force that is using that as the vessel it's choosing. It's
okay.
This is not like Nightmare on Elm Street 1 Freddy Krueger.
Well, the problem with that is that you need Krueger to be a character. And if he's just this evil generic demon, it's like, what's the point of this? Like, there's no
why have it be Freddy Krueger, quote unquote, at all?
At all, right?
Yeah.
So
it's just sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, just to finish it, like, if you're going to make it Krueger, I think Craven should have done a better job of the script using Krueger's character to highlight the themes of what he's talking about. He doesn't do that at all. It's just Freddy Krueger is a fairly generic character in this, and he's got the claw. He sort of chases people around like Freddy Krueger, which is he can never seem to slash anybody when he's chasing them. And like,
he's got stretchy arms.
Outside of that final thing,
arm.
He's just it was just a bad decision. If you're going to make it this generic demon, I think you have to thematically tie it into what Krueger is supposed to represent and be something, because otherwise I'm just watching some evil demon that's copying the greatest hits of Freddy Krueger. Who cares?
Right.
Who cares about that?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of feels like, to me, almost two different movies, because you've got the first half where they're dealing with Freddy Krueger, the idea, and then in the second half of the movie, it's like, okay, here's Freddy. Like, here's the thing that you came for. It's not supposed to be the exact same thing. This is technically a different thing. And I think you're right, Wes. I think it doesn't. They don't use it to its fullest potential as far as getting across the themes and stuff. I actually think, based on the stuff in this story, there's a much darker way you could do this story. Like you said, Wes, you've got the thing where at the hospital they're saying the mom isn't letting her sleep. They've got dropped these hints that she has schizophrenia and insanity in her family. The end of the movie involves her taking a bunch of sleeping pills.
That's actually my favorite, where the kid leaves them like Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs. I love that. That's the only thing that I think is really kind of brilliant in the movie. I really enjoyed that. Yeah.
that was cool. But again, he's leaving her sleeping pills.
Right.
So like in order to save her son and do this final battle with this evil, she essentially overdoses on sleeping pills.
Yeah.
So like there's a weird Mulholland Drive.
I was just thinking there's a David Lynch movie underneath all of this,
where you've got the idea of Freddy Krueger and everything that comes with it has driven Heather Langenkamp insane.
Yeah.
And she's now projecting onto her son. And it ends with her thinking she's saving her son, but she ends up killing herself by overdosing on sleeping pills, which is honestly a much more interesting movie.
Yeah, I mean, it gives you a lot more to think about.
Yeah. Going back to Scream for a minute, it's interesting. Is it interesting to you guys the way it is to me how Scream comes out 2 years later, like you said, Amanda, is very, very successful with a new property, where this is similar in idea, using a very, very well-known property and essentially flops?
I think it makes sense because I think, like we were saying earlier, the concept, the sort of overarching, like, what is he trying to say? Wes Craven has, what is he trying to convey with this movie is more developed in Scream. And I think it did a really smart thing by, like you said, the quote is that New Nightmare is for the sort of inner circle, and then Scream is for the fans. The fans are a much bigger audience. That makes it a lot more accessible and fun for a lot more people. So it makes sense to me that Scream is more successful despite being sort of a newcomer on the scene.
Well, you'd think that Nightmare on Elm Street has a huge fan base. So if you're doing something metatextual about that, and you're doing callbacks to that, you would think that those fans would respond to it.
Yeah, and I think some of them did, but like, for instance, look at what's just happening right now with Star Wars. There are lots and lots of hardcore Star Wars fans who are deeply unsatisfied with each and every new release.
Right.
There's something kind of wrong with it because they're so invested, they're so involved, they care so much that if there's something that sort of doesn't ring true to them and doesn't seem right to them, it's like a glaringly obvious error. And I could see that happening for Nightmare fans as well.
Yeah. Wes, do you have any thoughts on that?
I think Krueger is fundamentally flawed as a character. I don't think they've ever approached him correctly in these movies. I think that his look is iconic, and I think the performance is iconic, but for such a, like, and we talked about it in our coverage of Nightmare, for such a, like, imaginative, like, surreal villain, he's surprisingly just physically clunky. Like, they don't. How do you have this movie where you're doing all this sort of like meta commentary on things like this about what's going on in real life and not have dream sequences in it,
right?
Where you're seeing the stuff that you're trying to convey to the audience is part of this dream sequence, and that Krueger is there kind of like the evil gremlin who's the gremlin in the machine or whatever. They don't do anything like that. It's like, what's the point of this? Why do you have this character who can do these dream things and never use him effectively other than chase people around while they knock him over every once in a while?
Yeah, the closest they come to using Freddy effectively in a dream sequence, and it's not even fully Freddy, it's the opening of the movie where there's the claw. Like, as much as we were kind of saying it's sort of silly, he's way more effective in that. He kills like 3 people right off the bat.
Did you guys catch that when they're explaining the mechanical claw?
Bull tendons.
Yeah, one of the guys is like, there's like dog and bull tendons in there. It's pretty high-end stuff.
It's a bioengineering.
It's a cyborg claw hand.
He was thrown out of MIT.
Just wiping blood off the corner of his mouth, just like, oh, it tastes delicious, these claws.
Yeah. But no, I agree. It's especially, again, given the setup of what they have, which is, Heather Langenkamp being affected by the legacy of this movie and having real life trauma happen to her in this movie or in this story. They don't blur the line at all. Well,
and Craven just talks about his dream. He's like, I dreamed last night. I wrote a script about it.
And I think that kind of falls into where I feel like it's really lazy for the most part. Because so the thing I was thinking watching it this time is, it feels to me like they didn't have a big budget. They saved all their money for the last like half an hour.
Yeah.
When they do this, like he goes down into the Parthenon or something.
The Greek ruins that Freddy Krueger lives in.
Yeah. I guess it's supposed to be like ancient demon, ancient ruins.
Oh yeah,
whatever.
I guess you have to always think about that.
But that's really immaculately designed and really dark and lots of special effects going on. And there's a few like CGI shots and stuff. So that end sequences was clearly expensive. And they had the thing where the kid's trying to cross the street.
I really liked her sliding through the bed was cool.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
But if that was the case, I think that comes that does a disservice to the beginning of the movie, because then at the beginning of the movie, you've just got people talking about stuff, not really doing anything, and it's just kind of shot flat light in a boardroom, essentially.
Yeah.
And I think they really did drop the ball in terms of telling a really interesting story and using all of the Freddy Krueger stuff to their advantage to tell that story, instead of it just sort of being trappings for, kind of a half-baked idea. And I think there's another quote from Wes Craven that I think really sums up my feeling as far as this goes, where he said there was a early version of the script where he was supposed to be driving around in a van driven by Michael Berryman, the big bald guy from The Hills Have Eyes, and Wes Craven had cut his own eyelids off because he couldn't go to sleep because he needed to continue to write this thing, and he's going nuts and stuff.
Wow.
And then he said, I decided I would rather shoot at a really nice house. And I think that just sums up the whole thing for me, where it's like there's so much they could have done and so much interesting stuff they could have sunk their teeth into, but they just chose to all right, you know what? You're going to have a nice pair of pants for this scene.
Why did he come back for this movie?
So I think I believe part of it was that he and Bob Shea, who is the producer, who plays the producer in the movie, had been at odds for a long time, because New Line essentially owned all the rights to everything, and he didn't get a cut of any of the sequels or anything. Wow. And so they didn't have a great relationship because of what happened after the first movie. They made up. Wes Craven got retroactive cuts of all the sequels, as well as a piece of merchandise. So they were on at least monetarily better terms. And I think they came to him and were like, the 10-year anniversary's coming up. We'd love to do another one with you. Do you have any ideas? And he said he watched all of them. He couldn't figure out what the hell was going on.
Clearly.
And so he decided to just sort of reconceptualize things and go at it from a different angle, which is what gets you this movie.
Yeah.
It might be it might be like, I just related to the Star Trek podcast, kind of like you might watch it might be Craven's you're watching the episode of Star Trek, and then when we sit down to podcast, I'm like, I got nothing to say. Did Craven just show up on the first day of set and he's just like, I don't know. I don't care. I guess that's the overriding opinion about what he was doing. But I'm mostly surprised because it seems like it would be more, what you're saying, Clay, makes sense, but it feels like Craven coming back, you'd think he'd have this, even if he hated the franchise, he would have a perspective on the thing that he would want to get across. And it just seems like he doesn't really care.
I don't know that I would say he doesn't have a perspective, because I think the concept itself belies a perspective on the franchise, doesn't it? Because he's being fairly mean to it.
It does, but I think you think he would have a razor-honed edge about what he wanted to say about it.
Yeah, and I feel like he does have some thoughts about the idea of how these movies affect people and how they affect the people who make them, which is interesting. That's not really something you get to see that often. Is how, you're always hearing about how horror movies affect the people who watch them. You never hear about how they affect the people who made them. So that's kind of the angle, it seems like, that's in this movie, but still, I think it doesn't feel like it's totally cooked.
Yeah. Yeah, so Clay, how many times have you seen this?
5.
5? Wow, really?
Maybe.
Did it get better or worse with repeated viewings?
Worse.
Okay.
So this was one that I saw a long time ago, and I've watched it subsequent times, while doing other stuff. It's like, oh yeah, that one's fine.
Yeah.
when I sat down and watched it this time, I was really hoping that I was going to see, all right, I understand it. This is why everybody loves this movie. This is why it's so critically regarded. But it just didn't work for me. There's one sequence that I thought was great, that I thought was like, this is what I'm here for, which is when Heather is talking to John Saxon, and then they very slowly turn into Nancy and her father. And Freddy's like come up out of the bed, and he's sort of peeking out, and he's waiting for her to commit to being Nancy before he fully enters the world. Yeah. That was awesome. I thought that was great. But, the rest of it it wasn't, the first half of it looks crappy. Yep. It's kind of half-baked. There's maybe a couple good ideas, and then the last half of it's just a fairly standard Freddy Krueger movie.
Well, I want to go back. You say that this is a commentary on the people making the movie, right? Mm-hmm. Or like what it means to be people who made the horror movie. Are we supposed to interpret from this movie that the making of Nightmare was somehow haunting to people, or is it just that they were like the financial and like successful aspects of it were more annoying? Because I get no sense that making the movie was terrifying. If anything, the movie seems like it's focused purely on like external factors, like the stalking and things like that.
Yeah. I think it's supposed to be more like not the actual making of the movie that was the problem. It was the legacy of it and how that affects the people who were involved in it.
The fact that like Heather Langenkamp is always seen as Nancy now forever.
Right.
Like she can't escape that character. There's nothing she can do about it. Mm-hmm. And people are going to be consistently asking her like, "Oh, what about Freddy Krueger? What about, what would you do if he was here right now?" Like she's never going to not hear that.
I think the person who gets off like way too easy in this movie is Robert Englund.
Oh yeah, he's written as like rock star Jesus. Like everybody like loves him.
He comes in for basically 10 minutes of applause. Yeah. And then the next time you see him, he's like painting in his beautiful studio.
Yeah. And then
he's like fucks off and leaves town.
Some review called him Liam Neeson's doofus brother, which I think is good. I'm mostly the biggest surprise to me, being unfamiliar with this movie, is that Englund does not become Krueger in real life.
Or
that would have been interesting. That's a great idea.
I was just thinking something now. They should have had Freddy kill Robert Englund.
Ooh.
That would have been fun. Do something. Have him involved. Like if of all the people who are, not to completely reconceptualize this stuff, but you would think there would be like a core 3 characters in this movie who are all intensely affected by the story, right? Which are Heather, Wes Craven, and Robert Englund.
Yes.
And so they have their involvement somehow should be fairly equal in terms of intensity.
Yeah.
If you're going for this, how the people who made it have been affected by it.
But they're the 3 butting heads. You can write them as the butting heads, where Englund is enamored with the Krueger stuff.
Sure.
Heather Langenkamp wants to get away from it, and Craven is trying to mix the two or something. Like he's the kind of mediary,
or he's like the H.P. Lovecraft style
creator of this,
obsessed with the darkness, can't escape it if he wanted to.
I forgot. I thought that he was, the first time he shows up, Wes Craven was when she goes to see him. I forgot he was at the funeral scene.
He's in the opening shooting too.
Well, that's a dream. That doesn't count.
Oh, I see.
But he shows up at the funeral scene, and I'm thinking to myself watching this, going like, he's in the middle of writing the screenplay that everything he's writing is happening in real life, and he's just hanging out at the funeral, shaking hands, and like he's an extra in the background.
Yeah,
he has no weight to the story other than that one scene, and I feel like those 3 characters should be on much more equal footing, or at least have Robert Englund and Wes Craven freaking out a lot more.
And it's such a wanted to just real quick. It's such a weird thing to find out like 2/3 into the movie that Wes Craven, the character, knows everything that's happening and everything that's gonna happen. Like it's very jarring to find that out that late. Like there are hints earlier on with Robert Englund that he's been having nightmares and he's been having dreams, and I think that kind of works. And then you find out like so far into it that Wes Craven, he knows exactly what's been happening to poor Heather. Like, and he's just letting her like suffer through it without helping her at all. It's very jarring.
Imagine if you had a scene after that scene with the the talk show where Robert Englund doesn't want to get out of his makeup or something. You know, like something where he's like he's being pulled in a certain direction back towards the monster kind of thing. So he's, you know, they're leaving and he's like, I don't know, I think I might just
go home like
just
this.
wear this home. But you know, something like that.
Or just something subtle. He puts on the Krueger hat even if he's not in makeup.
Right,
yeah.
right.
You know? Or he wears the same jacket or something. I don't know.
Or in a similar vein, you know, if say Wes Craven kept trying to say like, Heather, I really need to talk to you, and she kept going, look, Wes, I'm sorry, I'm just not going to do the movie. I'm not interested. And he's like, no, I have something very important to tell you. We have to talk. And she's like, look, I'm flattered, I understand, but it's just not what I'm doing anymore. Like, that could have been interesting too if he was sort of like, I know what's going to happen. I know what's happening to you and your family.
That scene, he's not very forceful.
No,
I mean, I guess
he
you
doesn't
could
seem to have a sense of urgency.
I guess you could kind of read that as, well, he wrote it, he knows it's happening, he knows how it's going to end.
He's the
so
prophet.
why, you know, kind of like a Dr. Manhattan kind of sensibility about it where nothing surprises him, but that's boring.
Yeah, that's boring.
Yeah.
For a movie where Freddy Krueger is supposed to be reaching up through, you know, driver's seats and gently caressing crotches.
Yeah. Craven does have his hands in his pockets for most of his like he's not a man who seems particularly perturbed.
He's like checking his watch while he's telling her that she's in the middle of this grand battle between good and evil.
If smartphones existed in this movie, he would 100% have been like scrolling through Twitter while he was talking to her.
How come there's not a scene where Heather just goes, I don't know why I can't space, and then hard cut to Wes Craven falling asleep on the keyboard. But like as far as like a layup in this movie that they don't even imply, make Robert Englund the guy calling her house.
Yeah.
Easy. You know, he's freaking out. Something weird's going on, so he's
even if he's doing it in his sleep.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
That's you should write the movie.
I'm on it. I'm ready.
I think
which is a weird thing that never pays off. They never pay off that stalker thing at all. But
I think like judging by what we're talking about here now, I think that I think the biggest mistake that they made was that they didn't take the characters and make them effective enough of an allegory as to what the story is. Like he seems like he's treating it too realistically, and he doesn't want to create a scene where he can sort of play up the triple-headed monster that is Heather, Craven, and Englund at the same time. Mm-hmm. And like I just think if you did that, if you made Englund being consumed by the Krueger power, because like in tying this all into their fame and how they like personally see their careers at that point, that's just a better movie than what they've got going on here, where they're just sort of generically cast into these roles, and Englund really honestly doesn't really have a reason to be in this movie out of makeup. Like he doesn't do anything. So I think that was the problem, that they
except for go ahead, sorry.
No, they didn't go far enough with making a parable of the story. It's too realistic, and I know I complained about it being unrealistic, but it's shot unrealistically while being too realistic at the same time.
Yeah, like you mean like the hospital where they just let you walk into the morgue while they're doing autopsies.
And Amy was horrified by the nurses tricking her to give the shot to the son.
Oh my God. And that one nurse who does it looks so smug when she's done. She's got this look, this like, oh God.
You say he doesn't have any ideas. That seems like a biting indictment of the United States healthcare.
I know.
I think Wes Craven hates phones, nurses, and what else? What's a good third one?
He hates. He he hates not having pockets or something. I was assuming.
So what did you guys think about Dylan, the son?
I thought he was fairly interesting.
Really?
But I don't think it's really there was no real thing for me to grasp onto with him as far as like what was supposed to be happening or what wasn't supposed to be happening. It was a little bit, there's another idea where it was like the idea seems like it's kind of good, but the execution wasn't there for me.
Yeah, I don't know if it's because the last movie we talked about was The Shining, or that was not the last movie we talked about. We did Frankenstein, but before that we talked about The Shining, and I kind of got the vibe that this was like a low budget ripoff Danny Torrance.
Sure.
Which it just didn't work for me. Like I found him alternately grating and then just sort of empty. You know,
yeah, I think he's empty.
That,
yeah,
and that would kind of work if you're arguing for this like vessel for Freddy Krueger thing, but I feel like they didn't emphasize that enough either. And so there's this sort of, you're supposed to get this vibe of she's sort of the Wendy and he's Danny, and Krueger's the, you know, the evil incarnate trying to take her son away from her.
Right.
And
well, they
I don't know. It didn't work for me.
When you get into the end, right, it turns into what is Freddy? Let's use quotes here. What is quote unquote Freddy in this movie after? Is he after the kid or is he after Heather?
Heather.
He's after Heather, right?
Yeah, it's my understanding.
Right, because he has to get through her so that he can become real.
Right. So once he has them in his hell world, why does he go after the kid at all?
Yeah.
He should be like zeroing in on her, unless he's going after the kid in order to like use him or whatever. But he never gets to that point.
I mean, there is like, for me,
the alternate version of this movie is the kid is the one who kills him, right?
Yeah.
He goes after Heather, and then the kid is the one who, the kid, you know, the viewer of the movie,
right,
is the one who
the
ultimately
audience
destroys the monster.
Yeah, but so for me, the most chilling line in this movie to me was when Freddy calls her on the phone.
Does the tongue thing again?
Yeah, but when he first says, "I touched him."
Yeah.
That's like that was a line that belonged in a much darker version of this movie.
Yeah.
Because I heard that and I went, holy shit. Like that was like the scariest part of this movie.
Right.
And then then it's just like, yeah, no, we're not going to talk about that anymore.
Yeah. And I think that lack of focus is why Dylan doesn't super work the way, because he doesn't super work because he's not the focus of the story,
right.
But it seems like they're playing him as the focus of the story.
It's like,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I mean, to me, Krueger all the way from the original is about parents fearing for their kids and a kind of inability to help them and like causing damage to them in some indirect way. I don't know how you can have this movie with this kid be such a prominent part. And even if you're making it up and Langenkamp isn't like, a Hollywood celebrity, how her career is not damaging her child, where she's away from him, she feels regret for it, and Krueger becomes a symbol of that damage that is happening to this kid. And
absolutely.
They don't do anything with that. It's like, well, why? So you end up with the kid who's just there, who only seems to exist because when Krueger becomes Freddy Krueger in the last 20 minutes, they need a kid to be prominent for that part.
For a movie that wants to be very metaphorical and very thematic, it's extremely literal. Yeah. And I think that's probably its biggest fundamental flaw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So something I think is interesting, when we all talked about A Nightmare on Elm Street, I know I said this. I think maybe, Clay, you sort of kind of maybe agreed with me, that I thought it would be interesting if Nightmare on Elm Street, if there was a version that was told from the point of view of the parents.
Right, yes.
This sort of gives us that, but really doesn't.
Yeah.
And then ironically, when I watch this movie, I kind of want it, if we're going to have Dylan in it.
Right. Yep.
Could we have it from Dylan's point of view where, he's left alone a lot. I know, the babysitter's around, but like I have so many notes where it's like, oh, okay, your child's in the hospital and something's going. He's been having like seizures and foaming at the mouth. He tried to kill you with knives.
He's alone watching TV
leave.
a lot of the time. He's alone watching old horror movies.
Yeah, he's alone a lot. And I think
the fact that Heather doesn't get committed while she's at that hospital is astounding to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clearly a not good hospital. But like she walks in,
they get close.
Freaking out. Bleeding from the arm, yelling about her
where
kid.
Is my baby?
Yelling about Freddy Krueger while they're like, I think her kid hasn't slept in like 5 days, and she, and they just let her go. But obviously, it's a movie or whatever. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point where it's if you tell this story from the perspective of the kid, it basically is just Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yeah, where he keeps all the adults keep ignoring him. to the point where he can scale this giant replica of a spaceship and try to get God to take him to heaven.
Eventually, she pulls him aside and says that, Freddy's not here, baby, because Mama killed him or whatever. And then she knocks back some more vodka.
Yeah, and pops a couple more pills and calls it a night.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you guys have anything else you want to talk about with this before we wrap it up?
Amanda, after you.
No, I don't know. This was a really weird one for me.
Mm-hmm. I think part of the reason I watched it 5 or 6 times is because I had a huge crush on that babysitter when I was younger.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's cute.
super plain looking girl, right up my alley.
No, she's cute. Hey, look, the way she punched out that nurse.
Yeah.
It revised my opinion of her.
Honestly, kind of my type, but I think we can all agree though that Heather Langenkamp has like the best hair in any movie I've ever seen.
Oh my God, yes.
In all of horror, I think she must have the best hair. It's unbelievable.
Very thick and tossy. You can just toss it everywhere. It sticks. It's like Elaine Bennis' hair, it seems like.
I am deeply, deeply jealous of her hair. I kind of just as my final thing want to talk about like the fashion choices in this movie.
Yes.
It just visually, Visually, it's such a weird movie. Like it's a weird movie in every way, but especially in that way. And I do wonder if it were shot a little differently, whether that be darker or more dreamlike. Like, there are definitely moments where this movie tries to blur reality and dreams, and sometimes succeeds pretty well. But I think it would be helped if visually it sort of leaned into that theme more.
Yeah, I think that plays into my feelings about it, where it feels like on top of the idea pitch from Wes Craven, the follow-up pitch was, listen, this isn't going to be a hard movie to make. Robert, you're going to actually get to wear nice clothes instead of a mask and a ripped up sweater. Everyone's going to look good. Yeah. This is going to be bing, bang, boom. We're going to get it done. Don't worry about it. Like, it feels like that. It's like there's no character in the clothes except for this looks nice. Yeah. Or for the time, this looks nice.
Yes.
And the same with the way it's shot and everything.
Yeah, I don't think Craven is a good director. I just don't. He's the least scary horror director I think I can come up with, really. Like, I just don't. He doesn't seem to have a strong grasp, and especially in this movie, but I think it trickles into the other movies. The other movies are just probably made more effectively, and in the case of some of them, maybe made less effectively. But he doesn't. He seems to have interestingly, he seems to have little interest in the psychology of horror in a lot of ways. And
see, I was going to say the exact opposite, because I think he's more interested in the psychology or like the ideas and themes of it than he is in actually doing those things.
I would say he's interested in the occult ideas of things, but he's not. Yeah, sure. He's not interested in why that is scary to people.
Yeah,
sure.
Yeah. He's a concept guy. Like he likes conceptually the idea of a story that does this.
Yeah, he likes the haunted house.
But he doesn't like the details.
Yeah.
And I think that's just I just think that's the weakness. Like other great horror directors, I'm like, wow, that's a creepy idea, or what a creepy way to film that, or like what an unsettling idea that they've exposed here. Craven is like, I got a guy with knives, I'll have him pop out at people every once in a while. It's like that. I don't know. That's not as effective to me.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with he also. I've always kind of gotten the feeling from him that he doesn't particularly like making these movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and so while he finds something about it that he does grasp onto that he finds interesting, whether that's like this meta commentary on the franchise or this Hansel and Gretel allegory or whatever, he doesn't, when it comes down to, okay, now here's the part where the guy gets his throat cut open, he would rather not do that. Or like he thinks that stuff is beneath him. but he's never really excelled at the other stuff to the point where he's not David Cronenberg,
Right.
where you start off making these like body horror splatter pictures, then eventually you make like Eastern Promises or something, which is like dense with character work and theme, still has some weird shit in it, but is, he's clearly changed and advanced his line of thinking. I don't think he ever really got past being just sort of like a middle of the road, get it done kind of guy.
Yeah.
His aesthetic and his choices are just sort of, they're weird to me because they're from somebody who is very dedicated to the genre, but doesn't feel like a fan of the genre to me. Like, I'm sure he is, but just the way these movies come out, it's sort of like he's not loving about the details.
Right.
He's willing to sort of gloss over to get to his sort of darlings in whatever he's been writing. Like, if you can tell which scenes he likes.
Sure.
Because there's a little more meat to them. You kind of linger a little longer there. There's some really great set piece or something. And then everything else in between is just sort of like, well, I don't know. How do people act? Like, they're in their house.
Yeah.
That's it.
You could tell he really liked that one scene between Heather and Bob Shea, where it's shot really awkwardly, where it's got both of them on either side of a coffee table, and then the secretary or whoever comes in and just leans down right in front of the camera, so it's like camera barrel right down the middle of her shirt.
All the secretaries, I mean, I only saw 2. They were babes.
Yeah.
Like that first, when Heather first walks in and that very gorgeous receptionist just looks her up and down and is like, I'm sorry, who are you? I was like, I okay.
That's kind of what I feel like that was in the pitch, where he's like, Bob, you're going to be in it.
Yeah.
You're going to play you.
Surrounded by beautiful women.
Surrounded by hot chicks.
Yeah.
Everybody who's hot wants to work for you. It'll be great. Just give me the money.
You'll have your Andy Warhol ripoff Freddy Krueger pop art behind you, which, Clay, I want to find one of those for you so bad.
Oh, I'm sure you can find those.
I'm sure that exists on the internet. And then add to that just the very weird ending of this, the very, very end, the last scene.
Very in the mouth of madness.
But she just she
reads it to him.
Yeah, she reads it to him. I can't get over it.
Like the story that just happened when your father in real life was murdered by this guy.
Yes, let's talk about all the traumatic, horrible things that just happened. Let's just read them out loud.
Listen, kids like a story. They just want to hear that story over and over again. That's what this kid wants.
I guess
so. Final question, because I've heard multiple interviews with people talking about this movie say this, and I don't know where to fall. And they only say it because of Scream and because of the culture of meta pop culture that came after Scream with your Clerks and your et cetera, et cetera. Do you feel this movie is ahead of its time?
No,
I wouldn't say it feels ahead of its time.
Yeah. I don't think so. I don't think the idea is good enough.
No, I think you have to be good to be ahead of your time, kind of like
or at least just be fully formed.
Yes. Yeah.
Like
more,
even if the execution was
cohesive.
lacking, if there was a solid concept behind it, even if the execution wasn't as great, I would be willing to say, like, well, yeah, I think visionary wise it's there, but I don't with this one.
If you really want to give this that kind of credit, it's like going back to 1963 and finding the first band to use an organ in their rock band. It's like, well, they were really ahead of their time. It's like, well, it was also the only thing they had to play.
Right.
So, it's not Deep Purple.
Right.
They also have an organ.
Yeah.
Was every artist just completely unironic to this point? Like they clearly had to. It's just weird. Like Scream probably kickstarted something, but I would have to go. There must be horror movies from the 70s and 80s that are kind of doing the same thing.
Oh, sure, there sure are. Yeah. And I think one of the reasons why this doesn't work as well as Scream does is because if you really want to do what Scream is doing in this franchise, you're making essentially a latter series Nightmare on Elm Street movie, because those movies get super referential of themselves.
Yeah.
Very meta, where you've got like Freddy looking down the barrel of the camera, and they're making all sorts of jokes that are like references and other stuff, and like that's what they were trying to get away from. And I think that's probably why Scream is so successful, because it is a new thing that lets you look at the genre as a whole, instead of zeroing in on something very specific like this.
Yeah, and I stand by my statement that this feels like a first draft to me. Like there are hints at that kind of thing, like this sort of vague like references towards The Shining or Poltergeist or things like that, where it's a little like, I can see that he's drawing from other iconic horror movies in this. Yeah. But he just doesn't, he's like still too wrapped up in just referencing back to that little core in-group that was involved in making A Nightmare on Elm Street. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think that's going to do it for us with Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Would you guys, who would you recommend this to?
Wes?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't recommend this movie.
Fine answer. That works. Yes.
I'd have a hard time recommending the original. Really, like in the sense of like if someone was like, "Hey, I've got a month to go here. Like, give me 5 great horror movies to watch." Nightmare wouldn't be on that list, I don't think.
Yeah.
And this one.
That's because everyone's already seen it and loves it.
Wes. My wife Amy came in and watched this one, and she is fairly unfamiliar with. She knows the series and everything, but she was watching and going, Freddy Krueger is kind of goofy. Is he supposed to be goofy? Like, is he goofy like this? Why is he so goofy? And I just don't think that it's really that effective of a character. He's kind of overshot his potential in a lot of ways culturally, and I just don't think that he's that strong.
So your answer to the recommendation question is you wouldn't.
I would not recommend.
Yeah, just to tag on that, I agree. I think I said in the last one, or when we did Nightmare on Elm Street, I think if you were to try and revamp Freddy, it would have to be a ground up reimagining, because I don't think you can really do. I think it would be very tough to do Robert Englund style Freddy Krueger now and make him legitimately scary.
And he's actually not that funny in this one. He's not.
No, he's not supposed to be.
Yeah. This is supposed to be the scary one.
Yeah, I was gonna say if Amy thought this one was goofy, then God help her with the other ones.
It's true. It's just the performance. There's something strange about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, so I would recommend this to fans of prior Nightmare on Elm Street movies. And I would
stop.
Yeah, and I would recommend this to Wes Craven himself. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that. I think in order to really enjoy this one, you have to kind of understand the time when it came out and how big of a deal. It's like looking back at The Simpsons, right? And trying to explain to a child now that Bart Simpson was like the biggest thing in the world for like 5 years, or maybe even shorter than that. But there was a period of time where Bart Simpson and The Simpsons were the biggest thing in the world.
And then Cartman overtook him for about 4 years.
Yeah. But I think it's very difficult to contextualize that now.
Yeah.
Well, Clay, you can't see the jokes because they aspect ratioed the show.
That's true. Well, luckily they are fixing that. But like, I think that's why Scream, for as dated as it was, as we mentioned when we talked about it, I think that still works because that's more of a universal look. Whereas this one, in order for this one to really work, you have to understand who Freddy is, how big he was at the time, and who the people are in this movie that are involved.
You had to have watched, at minimum, A Nightmare on Elm Street, and I would argue you'd benefit from having watched like 2 and 3 as well.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, being unfamiliar with the cast is kind of catastrophic to this movie.
Yes.
Yeah. I will 100% admit, even though we only watched A Nightmare on Elm Street a couple months ago, I completely forgot that John Saxon is the cop who is Nancy's dad.
You think that's bad?
I forgot it was her dad.
You think that's bad? I just realized right now, I don't think in this movie anyone says Robert Englund, the guy who plays Freddy Krueger.
That's probably true.
Wrong. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
But that's the sort of thing you just take for granted going into this.
Yes. That's why I say this movie is very much for fans of the prior movies.
Yeah.
It feels like a big in-joke, and I feel like even just watching it myself, I feel like there were things that I missed, that there were references I missed, there were jokes and metatextual gestures that I completely missed because I'm not super familiar with the other ones.
Right, yeah.
Just watch the third one. The third one's the best Nightmare on Elm
I was going to
Street.
say, that one is on this list, so if you would like to come back and round out our Elm Street discussion and talk about the third one, we'd be happy to have you.
Sure. I remember that one being the only one that took full grasp of the concept of what this was supposed to be.
More or less, yeah.
I mean, I just like the Wes on Wes hatred.
That's right. I like how you guys thought you needed a guy named Wes to come in to explain the mindset of a person named Wes.
We had a quota we had to hit.
There can be only one.
It's nice when I run into people with that name because it doesn't happen very often.
Well, anytime you do, you say, well, not Craven, right? Because fuck that guy.
You're a bad director.
The go-to Wes is Snipes, actually. Everyone says Wes is Snipes.
Yeah, I get Clay Aiken a lot, which really...
Yeah.
It was
and then they punch you in the arm.
Yeah, growing up, it was anytime I was in art class and the clay came out, everyone would look at me and kind of giggle. And then I was like, it can't get worse than this. And then Clay Aiken appeared. So I was like, well, I guess it could always be worse.
Well,
anyway.
my husband is a ginger, so everyone who's ever had red hair, he gets called.
I've seen that happen.
You have seen that happen.
But yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks, guys, for coming in and talking about this. I hit the randomizer button, and I think next time, I'm happy about this because it's actually a movie that came out in the last 5 years, is going to be number 4, A Quiet Place, which I can't believe it's number 4.
Wow, yeah, that's number 4. Interesting.
But that's how Rotten Tomatoes scoring works, I guess. So, yeah, thank you guys for coming on. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Amanda.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we will see you next time with A Quiet Place.
Bye.